Utpatti Prakarana, The Origin, Chapter 2, The Story of Leela. A cloud of mist enveloped the region in an intimate embrace. Visibility got reduced to just a couple of feet. Though the eyes were helpless in bringing the sights from the world without, the other senses were too eager to exhibit their talent. There was the olfaction, which brought in the smell of the mist itself, the humid earth, the fungi growing on the trees, the pungent smell of red ants, and the humus of fallen leaves. The audition seemed to have improved remarkably. One could hear the sound of droplets of water falling from the wet leaves from the tree tops to the fallen ones on the ground, as though in remembrance of the relationship that was ended by the act of nature. The chirping of a variety of birds in the act of waking up, and in the background of all sound, there was the soft murmur of the river flowing as a monotone for the celestial music. It appeared as though even the tactility had improved. The sounds heard so far seemed to touch the experiencer, while the mist settled as millions of droplets on the hair and the fibers of the woolen shawl, and created goose pimples. The absence of vision had helped enlivening the other senses, which are otherwise taken for granted. At the same time, along with the senses, the mind too had taken to the flights of imagination. There were footsteps on the dry leaves. The weird sounds of some of the birds gave an impression of someone whispering an unknowable secret. An old forgotten rustic tune was heard. Just a little observation was sufficient to understand that the footsteps were one's own, the whisper and the tune were one's own creations. If there is fear, reason is definitely helpful. But if the mood is one of awe and wonder, and in some way touching the deeper layer of one's being, reason becomes a spoilt sport and an avoidable burden. The same conclusion is drawn from other experiences. We may see a destitute or an invalid who can be our beneficiary. The resultant compassion may goad us towards some acts of service or charity. But reason and intellect intervene and start forwarding all sorts of valid arguments against the noble act, as the explanation that the beggars and other parasites on the society are being encouraged through such acts. And reason happens to be so powerful a weapon that it is very difficult to cut. Our culture recognizes intellect and reasonable thought as instruments for understanding the existence, having the capacity to take us to higher faculties like intuition. But unfortunately, the intellect has presently become so powerful that it seems that we have become its instruments. We want sense proofs and reasonable explanations without which we do not accept anything as knowledge. Consequently, it becomes all the more difficult for us to understand the suggestive implications of our scriptures and make use of them. The scriptures employ different means in their attempt to convey that which transcends communication. The Puranas, through their symbology in the stories, and the Upanishads and other Vedantic works, through both reasonable and paradoxical statements. While works like Yoga Vasishta succeed in giving us glimpses by combining both these techniques. The most stubborn of the obstacles one has to face while embarking on a spiritual voyage is the mental rigidity and a kind of resistance to free ourselves from the grips of senses and in turn the dependence on the intellect. It is obvious that most of our understanding of the world is based on the information supplied by the senses, chosen by the mind, colored by its likes and dislikes. On such sense information, the intellect interprets, refracted by its own limitations. What remains is only a distorted, vague, or confused description. And yet, we are very confident of the efficiency of our senses, of our reason, and of our intellect. Unless one loosens this grip the instruments have over him or her, one cannot begin one's quest. To free himself of all obsessions, one has to become fluid and open. The teacher of Carlos Castaneda, Don Juan, puts it eloquently. The first act of a teacher is to introduce the idea that the world we think we see is only a view, a description of the world. Every effort of a teacher is geared to prove this point to his apprentice, but accepting it seems to be one of the hardest things one can do. We are complacently caught in our particular view of the world, which compels us to feel and act as if we knew everything about the world. A teacher, from the very act he performs, aims at stopping this view. It is the single most important technique that an apprentice can learn. Moreover, the man unseen is much more than the man seen, only the tip of an iceberg. Our view about the world limits the world to the description given by our limited senses, mind, and intellect. We laugh at a person who takes the world seen through the frame of a window to be the whole world. And yet, this is exactly what we do when we give so much importance to the sense data. Spirituality recognizes the complete man, accepting him with all his facets and the levels of existence. The story of Leela gives us further glimpses into the levels of existence, though the Vasishta names them as the three Akashas. A seeker has to remember that the names are only symbolic, used to suggest the levels of manifestation of the reality. There was a pious and just king named Padma. His wife Leela was like a shadow and mind to him. Being very attached to this king, Leela thought of finding out means of achieving the immortality of her lord and for maintaining his youth perpetually. Fear is natural, which protects life and is necessary for self-preservation and the perpetuation of species. But abhinivesha, or clinging to life, is predominantly found in us human beings. We have different institutions for justifying abhinivesha, marriage, family, society, and nation being some of them. We make use of different means for fulfilling this clinging: cleverness, greed, or infatuation. Sometimes the most subtle and lofty of all emotions, love, is also misused. This aspect has been depicted through the desire of Leela. She consulted some men of authority in the field of mantras and rituals. They said that all practices could only help her acquire occult powers and could not possibly arrest death in the world. Giving a thought over it, she decided to propitiate Saraswati, the goddess of learning, to keep the jiva of her beloved husband in the place itself in case he dies before her, so that she could be in a sweet company till her own death. Without the knowledge of King Padma, her husband, she started performing arduous penance consisting of prolonged fasts, chanting, and worship as advised by the wise men. Full of appreciation for Leela's sincere efforts, Goddess Saraswati manifested on the perceivable plane and asked Leela to seek boons. After offering the goddess respectful worship, Leela sought two boons. The first boon was to allow her lord's Jiva to remain in the palace even after his death, and the second was an appeal to the goddess to make herself visible whenever she was called. These boons were conferred on Leela by Saraswati. Years later, King Padma died. Goddess Saraswati, hovering in the same plane, appeared before Leela and advised Leela to cover the body of the deceased husband with flowers for keeping the body fresh, and observed that only the flowers would get withered with time. Following the advice, Leela spent a few days in the company of the lifeless body. But after all, how can one be happy with a corpse? Every time she looked at the body, the pleasant memories of his company came to her mind, increasing her misery. Meditating on Saraswati, she entreated the goddess to take her to wherever her husband was. The goddess explained Leela that the three planes of existence are named Chidakasha, also called Jnanakasha, the spiritual plane, Chittakasha, the mental plane, and Bhutakasha, the elemental plane. Out of the three planes, Chittakasha is the intermediate plane which is characterized by restlessness as the consciousness jumps from one object to another in Bhutakasha. The restlessness in the two lower akashas is due to the host of samskaras. By eliminating the samskaras, the light of Chit or the pure being manifests itself. When the understanding dawned on Leela, she could become receptive to Saraswati's grace and experience the state of Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Leela was able to escape from the imprisonment of the physical body. In a quiescent state, Leela beheld the capital city of an empire and later the emperor himself, who was young, handsome, and powerful. Leela was surprised to recognize her beloved husband Padma as that emperor. After visiting the other parts of the empire, she returned to her own palace. After duly meditating upon the goddess Saraswati, she sought a clarification as to how her husband could condition himself to a state which was equally elusive and capable of producing bondage as one he had already experienced in the Padma creation. Saraswati replied that it was due to the fact of differentiation that had begun in the Jnanakasha, which descended on to Chittakasha as a sankalpa or desire for kinship, that in turn manifested as Padma creation onto Bhutakasha, the elemental realm. As the desire remained unfulfilled even after Padma creation, he willed the second birth as Emperor Viduratha. The Padma creation itself was a part of a sankalpa of a Brahmin named Vasishta who lived in Girigrama on mountain village along with his beloved wife Arundhati. Though they were not the Vasishta and Arundhati, as far as either knowledge or experience was concerned, they were very devoted to each other. There came a retinue of a king with all his regalia near the village. On seeing it, there arose a sankalpa in the mind of Vasishta, and accordingly he performed all his duties sincerely, keeping it in his heart. But he died without fulfilling it. Arundhati, unaware of the desire in her husband's mind, had sought boons similar to Leela's from Saraswati. And when the pious Brahmin expired, his jiva kept hovering in the hut. But unable to bear the separation from the husband for more than 8 days, she had joined his subtle body to become Leela. For Leela, this explanation seemed too fantastic to be true. She raised a genuine doubt as to how could it be possible for the Brahmin couple living in a hut in which the Jiva of Vasishta hovered to be the Padma creation which had a large kingdom, and how could such a kingdom be contained in a small hut? Saraswati smilingly replied that beings like her, who flowed with the divine will, never found it necessary to transgress the truth. The Brahmin's jiva definitely hovered invisibly in the hut. The kingdom or regality did not have any material reality, but was only an ideation born when the Brahmin had seen the retinue of the king. The goddess added that the Vasishta Arundhati creation was causal to Padma Leela creation, which in turn was causal to Vidurata creation. Saraswati continued that only due to the difference in subtlety, Leela felt that the creations were different. Reality is all inclusive and contains every conceivable universe. Space and time are modifications of mind and are elusive. Even the present conclusions of science agree with this view when it says that space and time are relative. The involvement with the body and senses stops one from remembering the former life and experiences. This identification with the present life and experiences has to overcome for the recollection which paves way for the transcendence of the process of birth and death. This can be illustrated with experiences from everyday life. When one sleeps, the body as such is limited to the space occupied by it. But in the dreams seen by the person, which are created by mind due to incomplete desires, there are things, scenes, nature, and people who are all part of the ideation. In the wakeful consciousness, when one is walking on a hot day, the image of water, the reflection of the trees or other objects in it are all part of the optical illusion called mirage. However, during the process of dreaming or being under the influence of the mirage, whatever is seen or experienced is real, though on waking up or on seeing through the mirage, one can easily laugh over it. A habitual dreamer keeps believing in the events and things in the dream and goes on creating newer and more complicated dreams until it becomes an obstinate habit. This happens to be the case with most of us. Not only do we enjoy the self created illusions, but have made the dreams a part of our entertainment through the motion pictures. So much so that the people connected with the film industry have been rightly called as the dream merchants. We dream not only while we are asleep, but even while awake, as there is an undercurrent of dreams. This is because we have the habit of being in a perpetual dream. Goddess Saraswati was suggesting Leela that Vasishta Arundhati creation itself was a dream, in which Padma Leela creation was a dream within a dream, and Vidurata creation was a dream within a dream within a dream. And to understand the unreality of these dreams, she had to wake up to the state of Chidakasha or Jnanakasha. On hearing these facts, a natural curiosity took birth in Leela's mind to witness